Yo guys, I've got a spark which I'm gonna use to ignite the fire for another Skylanders video here on the channel. Now Skylanders notoriously has a huge gigantic cast, sometimes the posters to showcase every single Skylander you can get are so big that they wind up taking all of the room up on your bed. So what if we were to half the cast from each Skylanders game? What would the posters look like then? The choices I make are based on how iconic the character became and how important to the overall franchise they are, as well as how universally beloved they are, and since our cast will be smaller, this makes it all the more important to introduce extra creativity and distinctiveness when picking the characters for this final roster, which is why I'm starting with a fire element from Spyro's Adventure, where I'd like to eliminate Flameslinger and Sunburn, as we already have so many dragons from Spyro's Adventure, and whilst Rupture's design isn't nearly as good as Flameslinger's, he moves on based on his iconicness to the franchise and how beloved he is and recognisable as a character of not just Spyro's Adventure, but of the entirety of the franchise. He even went on to become one of the 5 main characters for the spin-off television show Skylanders Academy, and Igknight also has to stay, as this would set up for his legendary version, and they could craft a complete 3DS starter pack with this character still available in the roster, mind you. Moving along to the Magic cast, the characters I'd leave in are Spyro and Double Trouble, since Double Trouble has a very interesting development history, evolving from a boring Haldor design to the far more colourful and unique Double Trouble. He stands out as part of the roster, and this leaves room for the original scrap design to still be utilised as the NPC of Empire of Ice. Plus, Spyro is Spyro. I mean, he's literally in the name of the game, so we can't get rid of him so easily. Now for Earth, I reckon Terrafin and more importantly, Prison Break would stay. Prison Break's importance and influence toward this franchise can't be understated. There is 2 entire videos on both mine and Skylar Gamer TV's channels talking about the significance behind this character, so of course he ain't gonna be cut. Bash may have got a mini instead of Prison Break, but it's important to remember that Prison Break also got his Series 3 form, which looks awesome with red crystals. Plus, there's also the fact that he clearly influenced the shape of the Traptanium crystals for Trap Team, given that they are literally the same shape as his hands that can also be placed into the trap slot in a Traptanium portal, just like the traps can. Yeah, I wonder where they would have got the influence from, if not Prison Break. Moving along to the water element, I would have Gilgrunt and Slambam remain, meaning no more for Ridley! Well, not from Zap anyway. Without him existing, I'm sure that Ridley would have fell in love with some other character. Anyways, Gilgrunt was an obvious choice to remain, and I choose Slambam over Zap because he's more generally beloved and got an elite and superchargers, showcasing that he was more remembered and more important to developers than Zap. Plus, with the 4 arms, he certainly is a pretty unique and creative design to distinguish him from the rest of the limited cast, and better yet, he even stands out for all the correct reasons, I suppose. But moving along to tech, on the other hand, I reckon Boomer and Trigger Happy would remain. Boomer coming from the natural evolution of Bomb Troll, as he's one of the original 4 designed for Spyro's Adventure. I'm trying to minimalise on dragons and robots, as those designs can get tiresome and repetitive when used over and over again. Then Trigger Happy, same as Gilgrunt and Spyro, is being left in for quite self-explanatory reasons. But as for Undead, it would be Cinder and Ghost Roaster who I reckon would remain, as this was a Spyro game somewhat, so it is important for the developers to bring in characters from the Spyro franchise, which is where Cinder comes in, given how she originated from the Legend of Spyro series, mind you, and Ghost Roaster was also another one of the original 4 characters to be designed. Zap and Bash have already been scrapped, so I'd imagine that the developers would want to keep some of those original designs they worked on since the start of the development. This is where Ghost Roaster and Boomer come in. Ghost Roaster's design is also incredibly unique and memorable, and without Chop Chop, this also makes Igknight the only cast member who is a sword wielder, making him all the more unique for it. Air for SSA is tricky. Whirlwind obviously remains, being more iconic and more frequently reused than any of the other Air characters from this game. In fact, I'm pretty sure she has more versions than all of the other Air characters from SSA combined. Don't be looking that up. But that being said, she even went on to influence background story for the lore and the level of the Winter Keep in Skylanders Swap Force.
Many years ago, the Winter Keep fell under a curse that made it midnight for all eternity. Luckily, the Skylander Whirlwind came to the rescue. She enchanted a crystal horn called the Illuminator, which brought permanent daylight to the Frost Elves. Of course, now the elves never know when it's time for bed.
All the other characters on the other hand got the same number of returns throughout the franchise when you exclude things like chase variants and only look at the reposes and light core returns from later games. Now from personal experience, I've found that more people prefer Lightning Rod and Sonic Boom over Warnado, including myself, but if I had to pick between the two, I feel as though the design for Lightning Rod in comparison to Sonic Boom is more unique and memorable, plus we see statues of Lightning Rod in the Cloud Kingdom for Skylander Superchargers, so for these to make sense, the character actually has to exist in the first place. Finally, for the life element, I'd keep Stealth Wolf and Zook, as Zook was utilised more than the other two life Skylanders, getting an elite in Superchargers, and he gave birth to the meme, which is Shrook. We need Shrook. Without Shrook, the universe is doomed and life, as we know it, may well no longer exist. Shrook is love, Shrook is life. Stealth Wolf is also too important to this franchise. Camo would bring us yet another dragon, and we technically already have 3 of those, so another will just be repetitive and uninspired. And without Flameslinger, Stealth Wolf would remain as the only elf Skylander of the cast, making her also more unique in the process, so she's even more of a standout. So here is our finalised 16 characters from Spyro's Adventure. You still have the variety here. Double Trouble, Lightning Rod, Slam Bam, Prison Break and Ghost Roaster all have very unique designs and gameplay styles, whilst you still have all of the most iconic characters from the roster, including Spyro, Trigger Happy, Gilgrunt, Stealth Wolf, Eruptor, Whirlwind, Terrafin, and Cinder. Sure, it's heartbreaking to see a lot of other huge fan favourites no longer exist in this alternate cast, but that doesn't stop this cast from being certainly not half bad, as now there are only 3 dragons, and now these are the only characters in the entire cast with wings, so that can create for more exciting and varied gameplay between characters to characters, I suppose. And again, that makes all the designs all more distinctive, creative, and memorable because they stand out for all the right reasons, as there is a lack of repetition seen here. For now, we're not going to worry about variants, so how this would affect the 3DS starter pack is no doubt the question in everyone's mind, and I reckon we'd just substitute the Dark Spyro for his regular form and call it a day. I mean, we can't have Skylanders Adventure for the 3DS without Spyro after all. Now that this is all said and done with, let's finally move on to Giants. Halving for Giants cast results in 1 Giant, 1 brand new core, and 1 repose for each element. I would cut out light cores entirely since that comes equipped with the Giants as is, so there is no need for separate light cores on top of that in this altered cast where we only have half the Skylanders. The result for Undead, for me, would be Eyebrow, Series 2 Cinder, and Chop Chop. Yeah, I just said Chop Chop. When I said 1 new core for each element of Giants, I didn't say that the brand new cores had to remain the same as they were in Giants. Chop Chop may not have the most unique playstyle, at least not in my personal opinion, but his appearance is more unique and distinctive than Hex's or Fright Rider's, since he's not an elf, and you'll see later why another humanoid-looking character like Hex isn't a great idea. Plus, Chop Chop has an Archean design, which is very important for the story of Giants, as it features Archeans as the villains, so seeing one of them as one of the Skylander heroes instead would be incredibly cool. The only rule I have here is that we can't make up reposes we never got. which is why I choose Cinder for Series 2. For Fire, I'd reckon we'd have Series 2 Eruptor to ensure Eruptor's memorability and iconicness to the franchise remains strong moving forward. Of course, Hothead remains as well, and for the core, it's time to bring in Hot Dog, as he's still a beloved character and he's pretty unique, being the only dog Skylander in the entirety of the cast. Well, except for a certain funny bone which we'll address later. But for Magic, we have Ninjini, Series 2 Spyro, and Pop Fizz. This casting choice is pretty self-explanatory, so we're going to move on to Earth without further ado. My apologies for stutter, but what we have is Crusher, and for the core, I've gone with Dynarang, as the Stegosaurus with boomerangs is far more unique and memorable for a design than what a Gem Dragon is. We already have 3 dragons carrying over from SSA, so we don't really need a 4th. Then there is also for Series 2, where we could go with either Terrafin or Prison Break. Yes, Terrafin is certainly for more iconic and bigger fan favourite for Prison Break, but this is based on the developers' choices, and they were developing this game whilst Spyro's Adventure was only just being sold. They really had no way of gauging at the time who the most popular characters were gonna be. I'm pretty sure the 24 reposes and giants were just either picked out by Eeny Meeny Miny Mo or by dumb luck. Therefore, based on the importance and influence Prison Break had on the franchise, as I alluded to earlier, I'd have to go with Prison Break as a Series 2 here. He just seems as though it's for repos that the Toys for Bob development team would pick over the Terrafin repos, since the repos at hand is exceptional, and we need this in Giants as the perfect example of what a repos should look like. For water, I'd go with Thumpack, Series 2 Gilgrunt, and Whamshell, as I find a crab with a mace to be a more memorable and unique design over an armoured up human. For tech, I'd go with Bouncer, Series 2 Trigappy, and Sprocket, again for self-explanatory reasons. We all know that I'm notoriously not the biggest fan of Sprocket, but she certainly has some of the most unique gameplay of any Skylander series, therefore she stays, and she stays as pretty much one of our only humanoid looking characters, because without Chill or Hex, it makes this humanoid look more unique to her. Again, another reason for cutting Hex in the first place. But this leaves us with just Air and Life. Beginning with Air, we have Swarm, Series 2 Whirlwind, and Jetvac as the perfect air cast for Giants. But for Life, on the other hand, this is finally where we can see the return of Camo. I mean, when it comes to him versus Shroomboom, both had reposes that appeared after a break in between their games, so obviously they returned in Swap Force and Trap Team respectively. So either one pretty much got brought back, and you could argue that either one is as iconic as the other, but I'm letting my decision fall down solely to which one is more beloved by the fan base, and on a general scale that certainly is Camo. Plus, whilst Camo is yet another dragon, just like the 3 we've seen already, he has no wings and is covered entirely in leaves rather than scales, so that would make his design far more different and memorable when compared to other dragons. The Series 2 would be Stealth Elf, given her iconicness and importance to the franchise overall. Once again, it's incredibly important to maintain that momentum with her character and just, you know, keep her in the public eye. Remind people that Stealth Elf is a character that's here to stay. It's pretty much the same as what I said for Eruptor and his respective series too. So that brings us on to Swap Force, where we have a bit of a problem in the fact that there are 7 characters for each element, so that divided by 2 is 3.5. It's not a full integer, and we can't exactly just chop a Skylander in half and shove it into their element, call it a day and everything. But we'll address all of that later. For now, I'm simply going to strip away all of the light cores and keep 8 swappers to ensure we have at least 1 swapper for each skill and for each element. So that combination of swappers would be Bushbuckler, Magna Charge, Firecracken, Gorilla Driller, Trap Shadow, Night Shift, Boomjet, and Doomstone. This would mean that Rubble Rouse would get cut, which is great because his design is far too similar to that of Crusher, as would Blast Zone be cut since his design is too similar to that of Igniters. Now, for Tech and the Water swapping cast is a bit of an oddball one, because you can technically switch out of those 4 characters, because between those 2 elements they have only 2 different swap skills between them, Climb and Speed, so naturally you can have any combination of the 2, whether it's Washbuckler and Magna Charge or Spyrise and Freeze Blade. Personally, I decided to cut Freeze Blade and Spyrise. Whilst I love both these characters, especially from a design standpoint, the moveset for Freeze Blade involves freezing enemies, which is far too similar to that of Slambam's moveset. Now, Washbuckler and Magna Charge, on the other hand, play more uniquely than those counterparts. Whilst Magna Charge's design is similar to that of Bouncers, being a robot on one wheel and all, at the end of the day, you have to either sacrifice so you have similar designs or similar movesets, and I'd pick characters that play more uniquely over characters that have for similar designs, I suppose you could go as far to say, which is why I've gone with a Washbuckler and Magna Charge combination. As for the rest of the cast, every element would have a Series 2 and a brand new core. Starting with Magic, the Series 2 would be Pop Fizz, and the brand new core would be Starstrike, with her being iconic and more beloved than all of the other characters eliminated thus far. And for Series 2, Pop Fizz again is pretty self-explanatory. Plus, Starstrike plays so uniquely, as she's the only character in Swap Force who can attack whilst in mid-air, drawing a jump, mind you. So cutting Starstrike just isn't really a possibility, especially if you're trying to showcase that brand new jumping mechanic Swap Force possesses. But Earth, on the other hand, would be Scorp, again being a more beloved and unique character over everyone else who's been cut from the Earth cast thus far. Plus, with him having a rolling ability, it would be more unique now because Bash no longer exists. So it certainly is a unique move to him. But there is obviously the elephant in the room, and by elephant I mean turtle, because Slobbertooth, he could have made it based on iconicness and the importance of being within the dark starter pack for the game. But in this alternate cast where there are no variants, this means there also isn't a dark starter pack, so the point of Slobbertooth being in the dark edition for the game, that point is nullified, you could go as far to say. And Slobbertooth just is a really dull and boring character. I think the developers would have realised that through playtesting his gameplay and would have picked the far more fun character, especially from a gameplay and design standpoint, which is Scorp all the way. Though Slobbertooth, again, he definitely could have been unique in this altered universe. No Bash, no Voodoo, so being a turtle dragon amalgamation thing would have been unique. Series 2, meanwhile, would be Terrafin at last. To quickly interject, I did quickly whip up this Photoshop image of Series 2 Terrafin with a blue base, so that you can see a little more clearly what this alternate casting would result in. Whilst the Photoshop didn't take long, it would be too much of a task to take on every single character in this manner, plus it's much harder to alter colours of the bases like this on the moving frames as I take video. This Photoshop was done on a still image where I could adjust things on a pixel by pixel basis and make sure that shading and lighting remain consistent for the sake of the base as well as its natural thickness, which is why I didn't just use the bucket tool to colour all of the orange of the base in blue all at once. Naturally, to avoid wasting time and giving characters a crappy base job on the moving visuals, I'll limit all of the photoshopping I do in this video to just this one image. For water, neither of the cores and Swap Force went on to become iconic or all of that beloved by fans. Both of them are actually quite underrated if you were to ask me. But without Zap, I think this is the perfect opportunity to introduce Punk Shock anyway. Her design is incredibly detailed and unique, plus her moveset without Zap would be completely original, as she creates pool of water to electrify with all her other attacks, something which up until this moment we hadn't seen because again, Zap does not exist in this altered cast. Meanwhile, the Series 2 would be Slam Bam, as Whamshell never got a Series 2, so we can't use him for this slot unfortunately. For Fire, I'd introduce Frino as the brand new core. I mean, after all, he did get a repost in Trap Team, making me feel as though he was on the developer's mind much more, and as such, he became more iconic to a newer Skylander audience than Smolderdash ever did, with the fact that he did return in Trap Team and all that. But for the Series 2, we'd remain with Firebone Hotdog, purely because soon as the developers would have came up with this design, they would have knew that he needed a fiery bone in his mouth at some point. No altered cast could change that. For Tech, I'd have Countdown as the newly introduced Tech core, as he's not incredibly robotic, making his design unique amongst the Tech crowd. Then we'd have a Series 2 Sprocket on top of that, as once again, Boomer can't be chosen for this position. For Undead, there would be Series 2 Chop Chop this time around, as well as Rollerball being the brand new core, since she went on to become a huge fan favourite, and she even got picked over Chop Chop as a supercharger, which proves how much of an impact she made iconically to the franchise. In other words, she's far more important moving forward. We need Rollerball to exist in order for her supercharger revamp to possibly exist later down the line. We'll discuss that. But for now, we can point out the fact that Rollerball even got an appearance in Skylanders Academy, and whilst this doesn't guarantee a spot on this cast, I mean, look at Chill and Windup who've already been cut, it's still a detail to keep in mind about the iconicness and importance of the character to the franchise. Then for Air, I believe we'd have Series 2 Jetvac, and the new core would be Popthorn. Well, because Popthorn is just simply too beloved to be eliminated from the cast. I don't dare to think of how dark a world would be without Popthorn as a Skylander in the Swap Force. I mean, sure, he switched forms in his gameplay similar to that of Pop Fizz, but the moveset is different enough. The attacks and pacing wise are completely different between the two. Finally, for life, the new core would be Zulu, no doubt. When compared to Bumbleblast, his gameplay and his design are more unique and distinctive, which is important when the cast is much smaller. This is also where we would get a Series 2 camo once again. This cast you currently see before you still isn't an entire half of the Swap Force cast in its entirety. To properly even things out, we need 4 more characters. After all, we have 3 characters per element, and so far that would mean that we only halved 6 characters per element when there was actually 7. So naturally, with 1 character remaining per element, that's 8, and 8 divided by 2 is 4, hence where we get those 4 extra characters from. And said extra characters will be the only Series 3 characters found in the entirety of the game. And here is where I would choose Stealth Wolf, Spyro, Gilgrunt, and Cinder as our Series 3 characters. If I could have one more, it would be Trig Happy, but as it stands, these are a mix of the most iconic and most important characters to the franchise, as well as for 3 with the best ideas for reposes. Series 3 Eruptor, for example, feels rather uninspired. I mean, he's a volcanic rock that doesn't even have hands. There are only so many ways of reposing him. The new starter pack would also include Magna Charge over Blast Zone, as he could so easily fit into the starter pack alongside Washbuckler and Series 3 Stealth Wolf. Well, he could fit aesthetically at least. So now we move on to Trap Team, where technically the cast can't even be halved. It's not the same problem with Swap Force, where we'll have an even number per element because of the fact that there's an odd number in every element. The number of the cast of characters for this game is odd, period, even when you combine all of the elements together. So what do? We can't just half a Skylander like I alluded to earlier, so instead we'll round up, so this cast will get 1 extra character. First, and most importantly of all, I'd get rid of every single one of the minis. This way the cast can be 1 Trapmaster, 1 brand new core, and 1 repos. For magic, we want Enigma, obviously. Being able to eliminate Blastomine is the greatest blessing of this video thus far. And when it comes to Enigma, well, we can't pass up the opportunity to have a design that's as good as this and a character this beloved. As for the brand new character, I'd go with Deja Vu, and then for repos can be Series 3 Pop Fizz, so now we can finally see a pose with Pop Fizz's Beast Mode. Plus Deja Vu is incredibly unique from a gameplay and design standpoint, so why the heck not include her as the brand new core from this game? For Earth, we'd go with Wallop. For the brand new core, I feel like this is why we'd see Rocky Roll, as his design is far more unique than just yet another rock golem, unlike this bump. Plus, without Fright Rider, he'd be the only character who's actually riding something, making him all the more unique and memorable. As for the repos here, I would pick out Series 3 Prison Break. The red crystals just really suit the game aesthetically, especially since his hands are just like the Traptanium crystals. And for water, we'd have Snapshot. The new core would be Flipwreck, as none of the other eliminated characters seem to be more universally beloved or iconic than him, whilst for repos would be Series 4 Gilgrunt. For the fire element, the brand new core instead would be Smolderdash, as she is incredibly unique and our first ever female Skylander to be added to the cast at this point, and based on my personal experience, she's also pretty universally beloved, and could you blame people for falling in love with a character like this? I mean, she is such a beast, leaving us with no reason as to why she shouldn't have been introduced in this game. The repos at this point would also be Series 2 Frino. There is no getting rid of how glorious the motorcycle for his repos looks. Oh yes, and as for the Trapmaster, well, it would be Wildfire, no doubt about it. For the tech element, we'd have Jawbreaker. The brand new core would be Chopper. He went on to become very iconic, and his design would still come easy to the developers, as Chopper would still be the scrapped tech giant from Giants. Trigger Happy would also finally receive that Series 3 figure we've been waiting for. Just because Dynarang from Giants also was a dinosaur doesn't mean that Chopper won't be unique and distinctive. I mean, he's a Tyrannosaurus Rex, which is a completely different species to the Stegosaurus, and Chopper has a helicopter pack, which isn't Earth-related in the slightest, making him stand out from Dynarang, you know, two dinosaurs that are completely different species. Finally, the life element would possess Bushwhack. The brand new core would be High Five, as his design is far more intuitive, complex and detailed than the design of Food Fight, making for a more intriguing character all around. The repos would be Series 2 Zook. After all this time, he's finally returned, mainly because there are no reposes for me to utilise at this point. Would be similar to the original Trap Team cast though, as for life repos came from several games prior to Trap Team, and this is no different. Per our rule of rounding up and for light and dark elements as newly introduced in this game, we still have Nightlight and Nightmare because we need the two Trap Masters of the two brand new elements, which is why Crypt King was cut, less Trap Masters with swords, and Shortcut's design is just far more unique and creative, I feel like, making him a better cut for this cast. On top of that, we still have 3 slots left. I'd use those to ensure that we get Spotlight and Blackout as the new cores for light and dark elements, as well as a Series 2 Igniter for the fire element. Now I understand that we haven't really let variants sway the course of this list, so I want to go back to why I chose Igniter over Flameslinger earlier. It is mostly for Spyro's Adventure Starter Pack, as well as a little bias thrown in there, as Ignited is my favourite Skylander and all that. But ultimately, even without the legendary form, Ignited still got a Series 2, Flameslinger got a Series 2, so they are on even ground, and I think Ignited had enough to just barely edge out Flameslinger. Plus, Stealth Elf was never going to be cut from the cast, and having both Stealth Elf and Flameslinger as elves, that's one elf too many if you were to ask me, so it just keeps the designs all the more distinctive, unique, memorable, and more importantly yet, creative. Whoa, let's hold our horses for a moment. We're forgetting about 2 key elements here. Air and Undead. Firstly, I'd keep around Gusto as our Air Trap Master. For closest resemblance, we have to Asterix over here as Dynarang, but he has twin boomerangs and plays in a completely unique style, so I think I'll let the similar weaponry slide for the moment being. As for the Air Core, well, we've seen plenty of dragon and monkey Skylanders already, but with no tough look, I think a cat Skylander like Scratch would be really unique here. And for repos would be Series 3 Jetvac. I had so much choice here, but Jetvac is a character that speaks for itself when it comes to how much developers love this character for some reason. Plus his repos is awesome, so that certainly helps. Now for Undead, I was alluding to Funnybone earlier, but to ensure Hot Dog remains as the only dog Skylander, I'd actually cut him in favour for Batspin. Our repos, meanwhile, would be Series 3 Chop Chop. We gotta get a figure with those awesome double swords in somewhere. And finally, our Trap Master would also be Shortcut, with his design being really intricate and detailed. Plus, his Traptanium scissors make for a really unique weapon, much more so than just a sword, even if Crypt King's sword is incredibly awesome. The Trap Team's poster has more to it than just for Skylanders themselves. There is a whole other half to the Skylanders Trap Team cast, that being the villains. Luckily for us, every element except for the magic element have even numbers, so if they are easily divisible by 2. Chaos is also an element with only the 1 trap, therefore you can add the Chaos trap to the magic element and you have 4 characters to halve. Starting with tech, I'd keep Dr. Crankcase, Brawlerus and Mablobs, since they're the most unique tech villain designs. For water, I'd keep Gulper, Crosscrow and Fretpack. Already you're starting to notice a pattern in the fact that we obviously can't cut out the Doom Raiders. They're the main boss fights throughout the game. They're the only boss fights where defeating them and trapping them give you 3 unique moves rather than just the regular 2 from every other villain, mind you. And when it comes to Crosscrow and Fretpack, yes, Fretpack is a troll similar to that of Boomer, but they still have the most unique villain designs when compared to the other water element villains, mind you. Let's move on to the life element, where I'd keep Chompy Mage, Sheep Creep and Broccoli Guy, as once again, when our villain cast is complete, they'll wind up being the more unique and distinctive ones of the entirety of the villain cast thus far. and Broccoli Guy, Chompy Mage both become very iconic villains for the series, both of which eventually end up being part of Skylanders Academy. Again, not something that guarantees your spot on this cast, but definitely something that it doesn't hurt your chances of getting on it either. Now moving straight along to Undead, I'd keep Wolfgang and Hoodsicle. For Fire, I'd keep both Chef Pepperjack and Scrap Shooter, who would be a far more unique villain, as he'd now be the only Evilican from the entirety of the cast, and you'll see that once we're done here. For the air villains, I'd keep Dreamcatcher and Bad Juju, as they're a really unique pair within the element, plus adding Frankenstein would mean adding another Evilican besides just Scrap Shooter, so it's better to keep things unique here and cut Frankenstein in favour for Bad Juju instead. For magic, we'd have Painada, and then that extra slot is reserved for the Chaos Trap. So for light, we'd have Luminous and Blastotron. Finally, for dark, we'd have Nightshade and the Taekwon Crow. This way we still have all the Doom Raiders and characters that went on to become more iconic and even reappear in Skylanders Academy, besides Bombshell and Fisticuffs, but they'd still be enemies, which is where their bases in Skylanders Academy could be drawn from. There are also the villains which return in Imaginators to all be accounted for. We'll see which one of them made it back in Imaginators later on in the video, but for now we'll keep Life and Water with the 3 villains as they're the elements from the starter pack, which allows you greater access to villains right off the bat. For magic, I transfer Mablobs to that element. It still fits fairly well, and it evens out all of the non-starter pack elements so that each trap you buy outside of a starter pack, except for the Chaos one, can let you experiment around with 2 different villains. Now Superchargers is incredibly simple. I'd just eliminate for Nintendo guest stars, as well as for returning characters to leave with only the 10 brand new Superchargers, 1 for each of the 10 elements, as well as their respective vehicles, because this is Supercharger I was talking about. The game doesn't exactly work without said vehicles. For the starter pack, I feel as though we still need a female representative, so naturally I think Stormblade is a good fit for starter pack alongside Spitfire in replacement of super shit Stealth Elf. Not exactly like anybody's going to miss her. And yes, with Rollerball, I did say about how her future return in Superchargers did help rig things in her favour, and Rollerball, when compared to the characters eliminated, is still more unique and more fast-paced for the gameplay, which makes her more fun. So again, developers placed in the character would have likely want to have chosen her over Grim Creeper or anyone else for that matter. So even without the Supercharger revamp later down the line, Rollerball still had that impact and that importance, enough of which justifies her remaining within the Swap Force cast, mind you. Before we move on to Imaginators, what about the Elites? You could class them as variants, I suppose, but I figured that I may as well go over them anyways. We have referenced a few of them already, but we have 8 from Trap Team to consider and 6 from Superchargers, so halved, that's 4 and 3 respectively. For Trap Team, I'd pick Elite Stealth Elf, Terrafin, Spyro, and Whirlwind, as none of these received reposes for that game. For Superchargers, for 3 I'd choose our Slam Bam, Ghost Roaster and Boomer. When all these figurines are assembled with a Trap Team cast, you'll see why these were the best choices I could have made. Finally, we move on to Imaginators. 31 halved and rounded up is 16. We could have 1 original character for each of the 10 elements, as well as Chaos for 2 Crash Bandicoot guest stars who remain unlike the Nintendo ones because they were there to advertise obviously for the upcoming Crash Bandicoot Insane trilogy, so I can't imagine Activision passing up the chance to put them back into the game. Plus for the last Skylanders game to get 2 new guest stars, similar to how we got the 2 guest stars from the original Spyro's Adventure in the form of Spyro and Cinder, is a nice way to draw that full circle obviously. And Crash Bandicoot, those guest stars work on all of the different systems rather than just exclusively for Nintendo ones, so that way we're not like just limiting the cast as well as limiting accessibility to that cast. We're just limiting the cast now and not the accessibility to it. Like, the last thing you want is to halve the characters from a cast and then still turn around and say, oh yeah, if you're not on a Nintendo system you can't use them. Point is, that would add salt to a wound. But getting back on track, on top of the 10 original characters, 1 for each element, Chaos for 2 Crash Bandicoot guest stars, we have enough room after that for 3 returning villains. Now let's find a combination of characters which offer us the most unique designs and gameplay styles, and give us 1 original character for each element. This combination of characters would be Flarewolf, Aurora, Starcast, Tidepool, Buckshot, Chain Reaction, Tri-Tip, again a completely new and unique dinosaur species, differentiating him from Dynarang and Chopper. If anything, he's more similar to Whamshell, given that he has a mace as his weapon of choice. Then there is Ambush, Airstrike, and Pit Boss. All the Snake characters up until this point have been cut, making him more unique and distinctive, and definitely a far more exciting toy than that of Chopscotch, a glorified orb, mind you. Between the 13 characters we've already confirmed, we have one character from each battle class, except for Swashbuckler, Sorcerer, and Brawler, which each have 2, and Sentinel, which have none, meaning Hoodsicle is an easy choice to bring back, so we can have at least one Sentinel Sensei. I don't want to exceed 2 characters per battle class, so the final characters I'd bring back are Chompy Mage and Tycoon Crow from the Bazooka and Ninja classes respectively. We couldn't bring back Graveclobber, Golden Queen, and Bad Juju, as they would cause their respective battle classes, those being Brawler, Sorcerer, and Swashbuckler, to each possess 3 characters. This means the only villains I cut in the end were Blastotron, Wolfgang, Dr. Crankcase, and Painada. I just feel as though Chompy Mage was the most iconic. He was brought back from Giants for the sake of nostalgia, and he was the only Doom Raider we needed to see return, outside of Chaos obviously. Painada's figurine was awesome, and it's a shame not having it in the game, but Tycoon Crow is just too much of a huge fan favourite whom oozes charisma, therefore you can't say no to such an entertaining character. The only villain I was close to considering over him was Blastotron. I just find that Tycoon Crow's design is even more unique than Blastotron's, as Blastotron is a robot, and we've seen that done countless times throughout the previous Skylander games already, meaning there was no demand and inherent need for another one. Now, if that having been said and done, there were a few parts of this video where I went entirely off script, but I hope you enjoyed it regardless. I had a lot to say. You can tell that from the video's length alone, so I don't think I need to say that I had a lot to say, because just by doing that I'm proving how much more of a lot I have to say and what that is. This image that you see before you, this moving image, because that's how videos work, what it is it's the final cast of characters after I've halved the entire roster from each game. I, for one, think it still looks pretty glorious, and each character stands out a little bit more because they're all incredibly unique and distinctive from one another. There aren't 2 Skylanders which even come close to being similar in my eyes. In fact, the cast wound up being so large that I couldn't even fit Trap Team into the space provided. The sight of all of this alone would still make anyone's wallet sore, but we can't just leave Trap Team out, so here is the Trap Team halved cast in its entirety at least. As you can tell, my elite picks from earlier fit here quite nicely, as there are no repeats within each element, and the only element of the base 8 to be missing an elite is fire, as this is an element I gave the extra repos to, and I couldn't just drop my boy Series 2 Ignitor like that. Had Ignitor got an elite, this is probably where he'd be, or perhaps in this altered cast his Series 2 form is the elite. Anyways, this is quite the ensemble indeed, but it's time to roll that outro without further ado. With that being said and done, this video is coming to an end, and I want to thank you all so much for watching. By merely clicking on this video, you've shown support and helped it garner recognition so it can reach many of the viewers here on YouTube. I'd love to see you take the extra step and leave a like on the video if you enjoyed. Also be sure to comment below and push that subscribe button whilst you're down there. By clicking elsewhere on screen, you can either check out a video that's specifically picked out for you, or you can check out the rest of the playlist for a series you just watched. Before ending off, I'd like to thank all of my Blazing Knights and Scorching Dragons whose support helped make these videos possible. I'll be seeing you in the next video, and until that moment arises, peace!